You might have heard about the time the Dutch ate their prime minister and his brother. The brutal murder and cannibalism shocked Europe, and that shock reverberates to this day. Loyal viewers of this channel will know that we're about to go, well, actually, that didn't happen at this point in the video. However, we are not going to tell you that the Dutch didn't eat their prime minister, because they totally did. We are going to tell you about the gruesome details, and then we'll get to cooking with the correct ingredients. But before we get to all that, we need to understand how the Dutch got to that point in history. What happened back then for the most powerful man in the country, and arguably one of the most powerful people in the world at the time, to end up on the menu. A quick note here, we do have to flag that we are about to simplify a lot of things. The history of the Dutch Republic is wonderful and full of delightful tangents that I love, and I had to be restrained when writing this. I didn't even get to talk about the Union of Utrecht. Can you believe it? It's just... Oh yeah. So yes, if you notice some things being omitted or brushed over, those were probably all painful choices we've had to make. In 1581, this region seceded from the Habsburg Low Countries for a number of reasons, including most famously religious tensions caused by the Protestant Reformation. The Low Countries had for centuries been rich, but never fully politically independent. But in 1581, the Northern Netherlands achieved just that and became known as the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. This was a tiny state competing with the biggest powers in Europe, but things did not go poorly for them. Quite the contrary. The era from that split all the way to the day they ate their prime minister is to this day referred to as the Golden Age or Golden Century. So it looks like it went pretty well. In fact, it can be argued that the roots of things like modern capitalism, international law, and even the United States can be traced back to the Dutch Republic's golden era. These are all lovely tangents, but again, they would draw us far away from our story. What you need to remember for this video is that there's a tiny new state and is getting super rich and doing so quickly, without being part of the old feudal system. Throughout history, when you put a new political system in place and remove old institutions, you often get a lot of factional infighting. Did the Dutch Republic have any of that? Oh boy, did they ever. Officially, the Republic was ruled by the states. No, not those states. Each of the 7 provinces was governed by its own parliament-style council called staten or states. So technically, the Republic was a confederacy. However, in practice, most of the power quickly solidified around 2 positions, the stadtholder and the grand pensionary. The stadtholder was a position created long before the birth of the Republic. Originally, it was someone who ruled the province in the actual ruler's stead. You can sort of see it, stead, stad. So when the Burgundian dukes ruled the Low Countries, they ruled through stadholders. In the Dutch Republic, this position was closest to that of king. And like the title of king, it tended to stay in the family, only passing between male descendants of the House of Orange, the house of the man who led the initial revolt, William the Silent of Orange. We need to specify the silent here because just saying William of Orange doesn't really narrow things down. That's a lot of Orange Willies. To this day, William the Silent is seen by a lot of people as the father of the nation. Although there is debate on whether the nation was formed before or after the actual inception of the... Where? Oh, yeah, sorry. Where were we? Oh yes, stadholders. Although, like a king, a stadholder or stadholder wasn't in theory a king, because this title did not transfer upon death to the next in line. Legally speaking, the states could appoint anyone to the role, but in practice the position was always moved to the most senior male of the House of Orange. the Prince of Orange. Until it didn't. And that will become very important to our story. The supporters of the Prince of Orange were not surprisingly called the Orangists. The Orangists, who will be portrayed going forward by some oranges. We do educational comedy. We are not going to pass up an open goal like this. The Orangist faction consisted of the House of Orange and the old high nobility on the one hand and the common people on the other. The other powerful faction were the staet-en or statists, so named because they preferred the states or parliaments of the 7 provinces to hold more power than the stadtholder, whom they believed to be a king in all but name. The statists were mainly made up of the rich merchant classes, and their leader would usually become Grand Pensionary of Holland, officially just a senior civil servant. And that's all of our characters. So you might have noticed that we are missing a prime minister in all of this. That's because he's this guy, the Grand Pensionary. While not inherently powerful, official positions like this one sometimes gather power over time. A very good example being the office of British Prime Minister. It wasn't until the 20th century that the role of Prime Minister became legally defined as head of the government here in the UK. So technically speaking, the Dutch didn't eat their Prime Minister. They ate the Grand Pensionary of Holland. However, there is pretty widespread consensus that the Grand Pensionary of Holland was, for all intents and purposes, a Prime Minister. Also, just to clarify, we are generalizing in describing all these factions. There were status nobility and there were Orangist merchants. But in general, this is where these factions had their power bases. The Orangists wanted 2 main things. Firstly, close ties with England, as they wanted to be friendly with a strong fellow Protestant country. 2, a strong army to one day conquer back the southern Netherlands and defend themselves against Catholic kings. The statists wanted pretty much the opposite. They wanted close ties with France as protection against the Habsburg powers, which would then allow them to sink all their resources into the Republic's navy rather than the army. Despite the internal tensions, and oh boy, we'll get to those, the Republic was insanely successful. The economy was booming. Alliance-wise, the Republic was very good at playing France and England against each other. Until they weren't. Stadtholder William II of Orange was a bellicose figure. He resisted the peace that finally ended the 80 Years' War, was not happy with the growing tolerance towards Catholics in the Republic, and he even tried to stage a coup to grab power away from the states. His shenanigans backfired quite badly. His luck ran out in 1649. His father-in-law, Charles I, was executed by parliamentary forces here in England, leaving him without a strong international ally. William II's luck ran out even more in 1650, when he went hunting and caught smallpox. He died without an heir, sort of. His wife, Mary Stuart, daughter of Charles I, was still pregnant with their first child. William III was born 8 days after the passing of his father. The States postponed his appointment as stadtholder since he was too young. As soon as he came of age, they'd appoint him. No, really, promise. This was the first stadtholderless era, although they still had a now unchecked Grand Pensionary. And this is when the wealth of the Republic reached astronomical heights. This tiny country was outclassing all the traditional European powers. At one point, Cromwell's England being portrayed by a teapot here, because this is the internet and the pot looked fun. You know those googly eyes, they're just fun. Was at war with both France, that would be the Brie, and the Netherlands. In the peace negotiations that followed, the Dutch were led by a dashing young Grand Pensionary, Johan de Witt. He was a member of the Dutch regent class. Powerful patricians, but not high nobility. that derived their power from their mercantile wealth. He studied mathematics, but like any good Renaissance man, complemented this with things like jurisprudence, which he did in France. When negotiating a peace with Cromwell's England, de Witt made a very convenient concession by promising that the Dutch states would never again elevate a member of the House of Orange to the position of stadtholder, something which suited both Cromwell and the statists in the Republic. De Witt even managed to get the act passed by the states in secret, so that, initially, the Orangists were none the wiser. For a few years, things went great for de Witt and the statists, until Cromwell died and the monarchy of England was restored under Charles II. Remember baby William, the tangerine? His uncle, Charles II, had been his guardian since the death of his mother. So it's safe to say that the Orangists were emboldened. But they were the least of Johan de Witt's worries. For now. Baby William's uncle had launched a new naval war. The Republic won this war, with a little bit of French help, through bold actions like sailing up the Thames estuary and burning down huge parts of the British Navy. If you want to run these battles and intrigue yourself, you should be all over the upcoming release of... What's that? Oh. Paradox didn't want to sponsor us? It's still too small. Well, in that case, if you've enjoyed this video so far, please go ahead and click the like button. It really helps us out. Also, if you're new here, it would be amazing if you could subscribe. Thank you very much. So in short, not even a war was enough to bring down the statists and restore baby William as stadtholder. This was the height of the power for the statists, and some say their next act was pure hubris. In 1667, the States of Holland passed the Eternal Edict, abolishing the position of stadtholder. It did not go down well. As the 1660s turned into the 1670s, the luck of de Witt and the wider Republic ran out, as France and England started to get along and decided that all of the Republic's wealth was in dire need of some redistribution. 1672 is to this day known as the disaster year in the Netherlands. England declared a new naval war on the Republic, while the French invaded over land. The Dutch were able to delay the attack, but to do so they had to flood a bunch of fields, which caused a famine. All resources had been sunk into the navy, so the French army quickly came bearing down on Amsterdam, taking key cities like Utrecht. The Orangists saw their chance and started a pamphlet campaign spreading the news that if the stadtholder was restored, England would switch sides in the war. This was not true. In June of 1672, de Witt survived an assassination attempt, but it prompted him to resign as Grand Pensionary. Shortly after that, using some political brinkmanship, the Orangists finally placed William III as stadtholder of Holland. The first stadtholderless era had ended. William was an adult now. Weeks later, Orangists apprehended Johan de Witt's brother Cornelis, a prominent naval officer, for treason. On the 20th of August, Johan went to visit his imprisoned brother in The Hague. When he entered the prison, a large citizen militia followed him and killed both brothers. Afterwards, a mob dragged both their bodies out to the city's executioner's scaffold, strung them up and ripped them to shreds. What makes this lynching so notable is that we still have many first-hand accounts of the event. There are some discrepancies as to who actually killed the brothers. Some say the killing was carried out by the militia and the mob only mutilated the bodies. Others don't make that distinction. All sources agree, though, that the mob was keen on mutilating the hands of the corpses, as these were the fingers that had sworn in the Eternal Edict, the hated edict that had abolished the position of stadtholder. Sadly, mutilation of executed corpses was not that exceptional. But one thing that sources agree on, and that was pretty grim even for the time, is there was an element of cannibalism. Some who claim to have seen the events, like Joachim Daan, say that one man cut off pieces from a body, put them in his handkerchief and yelled to the crowd, "I will have these later with salt and pepper," before then being egged on by the crowd to take a bite right there and then. Other sources are significantly more explicit, even though all accounts we've seen contain shock at the notion of cannibalism. They also seem to agree that this wasn't as much eating the corpses as it was taking symbolic bites to emphasize their anger and rage. Whatever they ate, the shock reverberated across Europe. And through the ages, the lynching would go on to inspire art. Some of it so gruesome we genuinely cannot show it here. And stories for centuries to come. And to this day, there is historical debate as to how involved fresh stadtholder William III had been in all of these proceedings. But this does leave us in a bit of a pickle. If they just took some bites, what are we going to cook? Well, as we've just said, sources seem to agree that these were more symbolic bites, rather than the grotesque cookout it is sometimes depicted as. With one exception. In one retelling, there is mention of a man who didn't just take a bite. He cut out a piece from around the hip and yelled to the crowd that he was going to meet up with Surgeon Geyl and have this piece roasted. Which means we can talk a bit about Dutch culinary history. It is well known that the Dutch Republic established a global trading empire, which brought in plenty of spices. As more spices arrived in the port of Amsterdam, you would expect to see their use expand too, no? After all, they were getting cheaper. However, counterintuitively, the opposite happened. The variety in spices did increase, but the quantities used decreased compared to medieval recipes. Because of the influx of spices into Europe, the price of spices dropped, and so did the bragging rights for using those spices. This was a top-down trend, where the elite used less spices and began experimenting with other flavors like sourness or seasoning food with just pepper and salt. Interestingly, we've had to learn this through French cookbooks of the time rather than Dutch cookbooks. That's not because the Dutch didn't follow the trend, but more because, well, the Republic has a little bit of a blind spot as to they didn't write about food much. It does seem that, like good Calvinists, the people of the Republic kept their food very simple. When it comes to writing about food, the Republic, home of refined art, cutting-edge philosophy, and the cradle of modern economics, had, during its golden age, one book. When you look into cookbooks published during the Golden Age, you'll find that Dutch cookbook tends to refer to text published south of the border, which is roughly modern-day Belgium. And even the only recipe book that was published in the Republic mainly contained recipes lifted from French cookbooks. But where does this leave us with our prime ministerial roast? Well, there are a bunch of roasts and slow roasts in Kookboek of de Familiëren Keukenboek, which was published in Leuven in the southern Netherlands in 1612. It's pretty medieval in its spice use, but it's good enough. Now, we need to get some prime ministerial meat. Despite how much you might dislike your prime minister, you shouldn't eat them. Yes, we'll take a strong position on this. This channel advocates voting over cannibalism. I think we can get away with that. The book contains a lot of roast recipes, from ox to variations of birds, including crane and heron, to young goat. However, no pork, which is weird because it was among the most commonly eaten meats back then. So we are going to make the ox roast but use pork instead. We've been told that pork resembles human flesh the most. If you want to know how this recipe sounds in the language it is written in, become a member. Any of the tiers will do. We've got something planned for you. First, we need to salt the pork. For this, we're making a paste of salt, pounded onions, crushed fennel seeds and pepper. Rub the meat with the salt and onion paste and leave it for 4 hours. 4 hours is a good time because the meat had just been cut out of Johan de Witt's body, and one needs some time for the stomach to settle after carrying out a history-defying lynching and mutilation. What? It's a joke. After 4 hours, roast your joint in the usual way. It should be done on a spit roast, but we don't have one and you probably don't have one either. So just roast it as you would normally do. We've overlooked one thing here. We've made plenty of roasts on this channel, and usually you can just swap the old spit for a tray or a sturdy pan in the oven. However, with this salt-based marinade, it's not so easy. You see, we were left with a lot of hard salt residue. It all came off, no harm was done, it was a good roast, but it was a stupid amount of work afterwards. If this roast had been on a spit, that excess salt would have fallen off when it dried. This website made a modernized version of this roast, swapping the salt with a wine-based marinade, preserving most of the ingredients. This is a bit more domestic oven-friendly. We'll leave a link. It's in Dutch, but these days there are plenty of translation solutions. Anyway, back to our roast. When ready, the recipe recommends serving it with a sauce of vinegar, wine and the usual spices. We can go over the book to see what he meant with the usual spices, but a good trick is to just deglaze with some wine and or vinegar and then add a teaspoon of garam masala. You see, garam masala contains most of the spices that were popular back then. And this is how we cook ourselves one grand pensionary. We think he's best served with some potatoes and roast carrots. The latter being orange these days, in part because of the Dutch princes. You see, when farmer... yeah, sure. But that's a story for a different time. The historical significance of the lynching of the brothers de Witt and the subsequent acts of cannibalism are debated. 1672 is usually considered to be the end of the Dutch Republic's Golden Era, although economic decline would only really set in about 50 years later. An argument is made that this act of mob violence, especially in a nation with almost utopic aspirations, symbolizes a certain loss of innocence. Others will say that this was just political violence in an age where there simply was a lot of political violence. Being a head of government or state in the early modern era was a dangerous job. The killing of the brothers de Witt wasn't the first time an angry populace had killed a leader, and it wouldn't be the last. Johan de Witt wasn't even the first grand pensionary to be taken out by Orangists. Today, the Netherlands are actually a kingdom, and the royal family is indeed made up of the House of Orange. And the kingdom itself was conceived at the Council of Vienna by, the irony, Habsburg Austria. Surely poor Johan de Witt would balk knowing this. Well, maybe. But he might just think that he, in the long run, won. His country today is safe, prosperous, and weirdly, more of a republic than the actual republic ever was. We'll be back soon with more videos. Until then, please like and subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.